Hello, welcome to the History Inquirer. This is where we inquire into the past to understand our present. This week, in the United States, we are celebrating our independence from Great Britain. So I thought it would be fitting to do an episode on the Declaration of Independence. In this episode, we will uncover not only its history, but also its meaning and the philosophy behind it. And by the way, happy 4th of July. I want to really dive down and explore what this document means and what it represents, how it impacts the Constitution and us today. Yes, I know this is a lot to talk about, and this is going to be one of my longest videos to date. It's a lot of information, but I feel it is necessary if we are to understand what the document in the United States is all about. I will start by asking the questions, why and how did it happen? Who wrote it and what does it all mean? How does this affect us today in the 21st century? So let us get started. But first, about the flag behind me here. This is the Grand Union flag. It looks very much like an American flag, but it has the British King's colors in the corner there. The 13 stripes on there represent the 13 colonies as a symbol of the unity of them during this time period. And this is a flag that was in use early on in the Revolutionary War and would have been flown by the Americans during this time. Now, was it the flag that was flying over Independence Hall while they're going over and debating the Declaration of Independence while they were signing it? I don't know specifically, but it was the flag that they were using at the time, so it is likely. Anyways, in 1777, under the Flag Act, this flag will be replaced by the Betsy Ross flag, by the Stars and Stripes. Okay? And since this is the 249th anniversary of our independence, I think it only fitting that I retire this flag as well and go with something a little more appropriate, that being the Stars and Stripes. Be back in one moment. And we're back. Actually, it's been a week since I first recorded the previous segment. I've been having technical difficulties of all kinds trying to get this video out to all of you, and finally be able to do it. I also have some music in the background. I hope you like it. I also like this flag better than the Grand Union flag. I think it goes better with the 4th of July Independence theme we have going on here. Anyways, I really hope that you like the video and that you enjoy the music I have and anything else. So, without further ado, let's get started. So after the French Indian War, Britain sought tighter control over its colonies and imposed taxes like the Stamp Act without colonial consent. This was done as a means of collecting revenue to pay off the debts that the British incurred during the French and Indian War and to pay for the protection of the colonies from the French and the natives. What angered the colonists was that they had no representatives from any of the American colonies in Parliament advocating on their behalf. The lack of actual representation in Parliament, coupled with geographic and political differences, fueled colonial grievances. By the 1770s, many colonists believed they no longer needed British rule. The First Continental Congress met in 1774, followed by a second in 1775 to address the grievances and address what was going on in the colonies. The Revolutionary War began with the battles of Lexington and Concord in 1775, actually before the meeting of the Second Continental Congress, and prompted King George III to declare the colonies in rebellion. Influenced by Thomas Paine's common sense, calls for independence grew, setting the stage for the Declaration of Independence. The year was 1776. In June of that year, Richard Henry Lee introduced a resolution for independence and a committee of 5 members, including Ben Franklin and John Adams, but Thomas Jefferson at its head was appointed to draft the resolution documents. On June 11th, Thomas Jefferson wrote the first draft himself and sent it to John Adams and Ben Franklin for review. On July 2nd, the Declaration was debated and voted on in the Continental Congress. The resolution to separate from Great Britain was passed and approved on that day. However, the Declaration was not adopted until July 4th, 2 days later. In a letter to Henry Lee, dated May 8th, 1825, Thomas Jefferson wrote that when enforced, therefore, to resort to arms for redress and appeal to the tribunal of the world was deemed proper for justification. This was the object of the Declaration of Independence. Not to find out new principles or new arguments never before thought of, but to place before mankind, before the common sense of the subject in terms so plain and firm as to command their assent. It was intended to be an expression of the American mind. As he says, they're not trying to do anything new. They're not trying to reinvent the wheel, so to speak. The Declaration was not only an announcement of independence, but a justification of the reasons for independence. And an expression of the American mind, he says. The things that were going on inside people's heads at the time. These are their principles. These are our principles that we hold dear as Americans. Now, of course, they're not American, then, well, but this is a expression of our principles. Yeah. Americans, this document was not just meant for us as Americans, it is meant for the world. It has influenced revolutions around the world and governments. So, moving on. Now you're probably thinking, this is all well and good, okay? But what does the document actually say? Let's sit down in that chair right there and I'll tell you. Grab a drink and a snack if you haven't already. And now I shall read for you the Declaration of Independence and provide commentary. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve political bands which have connected them with one another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitled them. And I'll stop there. So, what he's saying here is that it has become necessary for us to declare independence, but also to become a separate nation equal to the likes of France and Spain and Great Britain. And he also has a line in there about the laws of nature and nature's God, and where that comes from is Aristotle, specifically Aristotle's Ethics, where he's talking about the different vices like theft, adultery, murder, and as you're reading it and as listening to me tell it to you, you may be thinking, hey, that sounds kind of like the Ten Commandments, and you'd be right. And what's interesting is that Aristotle, he says that how he knows that these things are wrong and that other things, virtues, are right, is that he has this natural faculty by which he knows these things. He knows by nature. And this idea will be taken further by Cicero and by Thomas Aquinas, who would give us the concept of natural law. And Thomas Aquinas, who would also read St. Augustine, would also give us the idea of the divine law. Not these things in themselves, but the idea, the concept of divine law and natural law. And Thomas Jefferson, writing in 1776, will give us the laws of nature and nature's God. I find that very interesting, and I hope you do too. Moving on. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes that compel them to separation. Okay, so now we're getting to the reasons why we're declaring our independence, the causes. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Pause there. So, first part, all men are created equal. Actually, before that, the word self-evident basically means it is obvious. Okay, that all men are created equal. We are all human. Okay, and that word men, back then, it was inclusive of men and women. What the word mankind means, men and women, all human beings are created equal. A state of nature. So we're all human. We all put our parents the same way. Okay. And we're endowed by Creator with certain inalienable rights. That among these are life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And that phrase, life, liberty, and happiness, actually comes from Aristotle. Well, part about happiness comes from Aristotle, but the life, liberty, and property comes from John Locke in the second treatise on government. But like I said earlier, so the part about happiness comes from Aristotle in his Ethics, and the reason why Thomas Jefferson uses happiness is because it includes property, yes, but it also includes things like wealth and health and family and love and safety and security and all these other things. And Aristotle says that happiness is an activity of the soul in accord with virtue. That happiness is the highest virtue, the thing that we should all aspire towards, the thing that we should pursue. And then he says in his politics that the best governments are the ones that allow people the freedom, the liberty to pursue happiness. And that's why that's in there. I hope you find it interesting, as I do. And moving on. To secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Very important, consent of the governed. And the reason why governments are formed in the first place is to secure the rights of life, liberty, and happiness. Okay. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence indeed would dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience has shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. I'll pause there. So, what he's saying is that when government becomes destructive of these ends, when they violate our rights to life, liberty, and property, then it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, so that our rights can be secured once more. And it should not be done for light and transient causes. We do not want to upset the fruit basket, so to speak. We do not want to cause massive upheaval. We do not want to, like massive change. Okay. We are more, like it says, we are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable. We are more disposed to go along to get along. But when a long train of uses and usurpations pursuing invariably the same object, if it is a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and provide new guards for the future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. So what he's saying here is that when you have this long train of abuses and usurpations, okay, when you have this series of violations of our rights, it becomes the right of the people to throw off such government. And that these colonies have been experiencing this. And here are the facts. This is what's been going on. He has refused to assent to laws, the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. So the colonial legislatures would pass laws and the king would veto them. An example would be the Massachusetts legislature passed a law that would slow the growth of slavery. Another example would be pardoning the state-backed protesters and compensating for damages. And the colonists had actually wrote to one of the ministers of state of Great Britain about this matter, and they said, yeah, go ahead and pass it. And the king vetoed it. Okay, and vetoed a law slowing the growth of slavery. Like, why? He has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance, unless suspended in their operation till his assent should be obtained, and when so suspended, he is utterly neglected to attend to them. And I got task playing. Kind of funny. Anyways, so the king ordered his governors to refuse to endorse laws or pass laws. He has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people unless those people would relinquish the right of representation in the legislature, a right inestimable to them and formidable to tyrants only. Ignoring the will of the people. Ignoring or negating laws passed by the colonial assemblies. Rule by executive fiat, essentially. Disregarding colonial legislatures. He has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository of their public records for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with those measures. Now what's going on here is that Parliament in 1774 passed the Massachusetts Government Act, thus nullifying the Charter of 1691. And the Assembly was dissolved and forced to meet in Salem on orders of General Thomas Gage, the acting governor. He also quartered troops in people's homes without their consent, but more on that later. He has dissolved representative houses repeatedly, proposing with manly firmness his invasions on the rights of the people. Colonial assemblies were dissolved in Massachusetts, Virginia, and North Carolina, while others were threatened with being dissolved. He's refused for a long time after such dissolutions to cause others to be elected, whereby legislative powers incapable of annihilation have returned to the people at large for their exercise, the state remaining in the meantime exposed to all the dangers of invasion from without and convulsions within. So the assemblies that had been dissolved were not permitted to meet again for a while, almost a year for Massachusetts. He has endeavored to prevent the population of these states for the purpose of obstructing laws for naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migrations hither, and raising the conditions of new appropriations of lands. So the king wanted to restrict or discourage immigration of German immigrants, among others who were conservative, not Anglican, and opposed to British rule. Also, the Proclamation of 1763 sought to prevent colonial expansion into Native American lands won during the French and Indian War to reduce conflict. Now, you're saying, okay, reducing conflict is good, but from the colonists' perspective, they had just won a war against the French and Indians. They just essentially won the right to these lands, and the king has taken it away. So, and now they can't expand. And so for them, this is not good. He has obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent to laws for establishing judiciary powers. So the colonists of Massachusetts in 1774 were denied the right to elect their own judges, as well as the right to trial by jury. The other colonies had similar issues. He has made judges dependent on his will alone for the tenure of their offices and the amount and payment of their salaries. So the judges were dependent on the King George III and Parliament, their salaries coming from the taxes and duties levied on the colonists without their consent. So there's not only were these judges being appointed without the colonists' consent, but they're also biased towards the king and parliament against the colonists. Not good. He's erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. So new taxes required new tax collectors, which also led to new admiralty and vice admiralty courts, which led to the swarms of officers being paid high taxes from the new taxes on the colonists. A vicious cycle. He has kept among us, in times of peace, standing armies without the consent of the legislatures. So when the troops stationed in the colonies were placed there to protect the colonists from the Native Americans and serve as a deterrent to the French, they were soon perceived as enforcers of the new taxes, especially under General Thomas Gage in Massachusetts. He is affected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power. So by appointing General Thomas Gage as military governor of Massachusetts, King George III took power away from the civil power the colonial legislature and gave it to the military without their consent, without the consent of the colonists. He has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our constitution and unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation. So the King and Parliament established the Board of Trade, which operated independently of the colonial legislatures and could enforce revenue laws, for quartering large bodies of armed troops among us. So the Quartering Act allowed British officers to house their soldiers on private property without the consent of the owners and punish those who refused. So you think about it. Here you are sitting in your home and you get knocked on the door and it's a British officer and they want to house their soldiers on your property. And you have to go along with it. Not just in your property, but possibly in your home as well. And if you speak out against it, they get to punish you for it. Furthermore, for protecting them by a mock trial from punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states. So, these British troops that are then staying on your property, in your home possibly, if they commit crimes or let go despite evidence to the contrary. So basically they're immune from committing crimes. They're immune from prosecution for committing crimes, is what I'm trying to say. So if they commit any crimes against you or your family, they're let go. Yeah, you can kind of see why we wanted to declare independence. You can see why we wanted to rebel against this kind of thing. Moving on. For cutting off our trade with all parts of the world. And this refers to the Navigation Acts, which hindered trade between the colonies and other countries like France and Spain, for imposing taxes on us without our consent. In other words, no taxation without representation, like the Sugar Act, Stamp Act, Intelligible Act, Tea Act, etc. Okay, if taxes and being imposed on us without our consent, for depriving us, in many cases, of the benefits of trial by jury. So people were being tried in admiralty courts where the prosecution was biased towards the British, for transporting us beyond the seas to be tried for pretended offenses. So under the Administration of Justice Act, if a person was indicted for a capital offense or for rioting, etc., the accused could be sent to their country or England for trial. For abolishing the free system of English laws in a neighboring province, establishing therein an arbitrary government, and enlarging its boundaries so as to render it at once an example and fit instrument for introducing the same absolute rule into these colonies. So what's going on here is the Quebec Act of 1774 reinstated French civil law, allowing freedom of worship to Catholics, and expanded Canadian territory, while the American colonists were required to support the Anglican Church and prohibited from expanding into the Native American lands beyond the Appalachian Mountains. For taking away our charters, abolishing our most valuable laws, and altering fundamentally the forms of our governments. British royal governors were given the power to appoint and remove judges along with other officers and make them subservient to the crown. In effect, the royal governors were acting as kings, as tyrants. for suspending our own legislatures and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever. So the British government, as appointing the governors, the officers, the judges, and suspending the legislatures, ignoring the representatives of the people, and taxing us without our consent. Not good. He has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. So in 1775, the king sent troops against the towns of Lexington and Concord, igniting the Revolutionary War, and gave governors the power to use Native Americans against the colonists. The king also hired Hessian mercenaries from Germany to be used against us as well. The rural governors launched... These plundered our seas, ravaged our coasts, and burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. So the rural governors launched naval attacks against ports that supply the Patriot cause. They also seized merchant ships and burned the port town of Falmouth in the colony of Massachusetts. Not to be confused with the modern day city of Falmouth. The port town of Falmouth in question is now Portland, Maine. Okay, and this was done in 1775. He is at this time transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny already begun with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages and totally unworthy of the head of a civilization. The king hired Hessian mercenaries who were known for their brutality and cruelty and use of their bayonets even on those who had surrendered. He has constrained our fellow citizens taken captive on the high seas to bear arms against their country, to become the executioners of their friends and brethren, or to fall themselves by their hands. This concerns the impressment of American sailors into the British Navy and forcing them to fight against their own people. This was condemned as an act of savagery. He has excited domestic insurrections amongst us and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers, the merciless Indian savages, whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. As stated earlier, the British used the natives against the colonies to prevent their westward expansion. During the Revolution, the Native American tribes would have to choose a side, and ultimately many sided with the British. And that was unfortunate for them because the Americans had a negative view of the natives as a result. But not entirely. There were acts of compassion by them towards the natives. But that's a video for another time. So in every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. The colonists repeatedly sent petitions to the king and parliament to address their grievances peacefully, but were ignored and given more things to be grieved about, to be worried about. Nor have we been wanting in our attentions to our British brethren. We have warned them from time to time of attempts by the legislature to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We have reminded them of the circumstances of our emigration and settlement here. We have appealed to their native justice and magnanimity, and we have conjured them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations, which would inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence. They too have been deaf to the voice of justice and of consanguinity. We must therefore acquiesce to the necessity which denounces our separation, and hold them as we hold the rest of mankind, enemies in war, and in peace, friends. So the colonists wrote letters to their fellow British subjects in Great Britain to try and get them to act in their behalf and possibly influence the king and parliament in their favor, but to no avail. We therefore, the representatives of the United States of America, in a General Congress assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do, in the name of and by the authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states. That these united colonies are United colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states, and that they are resolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do, and for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. So it concludes the Declaration of Independence. But while the Declaration would be adopted on July 4th, 1776, it would not be signed until August, though the first printing has the name of John Hancock at the bottom. And when it was eventually signed, it was signed by 56 delegates from all 13 colonies. The principles enshrined in the Declaration have shaped the conversation of freedom, equality, and human rights around the world. These principles would also inform the drafters of the U.S. Constitution in 1787. As President Abraham Lincoln in 1861 wrote this fragment on the Constitution and the Union, the principle of liberty to all, the principle that clears the path for all, gives hope to all, and by consequence, enterprise and industry to all. The expression of that principle in our Declaration of Independence was most happy and fortunate. Without it, we could not, I think, have secured our free government and consequent prosperity. No oppressed people will fight and endure as our fathers did, without the promise of something better than mere change of masters. The assertion of that principle at that time was the word fitly spoken, which has proved an apple of gold to us. The Union and the Constitution are the picture of silver subsequently formed around it. The picture was made not to conceal or destroy the apple, but to adorn and preserve it. In other words, the Declaration is the apple of gold, our principles. And the Constitution is a framework by which those principles are put into practice. And I think this is beautiful. It's actually an answer to each one of those grievances, well, most of them, in our Constitution. Now, you might be saying this is all well and good, but what does it mean for us in the 21st century? I mean, after all, we have planes, trains, and automobiles. We have computers and artificial intelligence. We have also made progress in other areas as well, such as human and civil rights, etc. Now for this, I will read a quote from President Calvin Coolidge from a speech they gave on the 150th anniversary of American independence. He says about the Declaration, there is a finality that is exceedingly restful. It is often asserted that the world has made a great deal of progress since 1776, that we have had new thoughts and new experiences, which have given us a great advance over the people of that day, and that we may therefore very well discard their conclusions for something more modern. If all men are created equal, that is final. If they are endowed inalienable rights, that is final. No advance, no progress can be made beyond these propositions. If anyone wishes to deny their truth or their soundness, the only direction in which he can proceed historically is not forward, but backward, toward the time when there was no equality, no rights of the individual, no rule of the people. We live in an age of science and abounding accumulation of material things. These did not create our decoration. Our decoration created them. The things of the Spirit come first. Unless we cling to that, all our material prosperity will turn to a barren scepter in our grasp. If we are to maintain the great heritage which has been bequeathed to us, we must be like-minded as the fathers who created it. Thus, in order to maintain and keep our Republic of the United States of America alive, in order to keep the dream of our founding fathers alive, we must learn the things they did and remain vigilant. As far as history goes, as far as American history goes, I'll help you out. So in this channel, and I'll help you. In the words of President Ronald Reagan, freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. The only way we can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and hand it to them the well-fought lessons of how they must do the same. So to conclude, which is now a very long video, as we celebrate the 4th of July, and I know it has already passed, but nevertheless, as we celebrate the 4th of July with our families and loved ones, watch fireworks, eat hamburgers and hot dogs, barbecue, etc., let's all take a moment to pause and reflect on the Declaration of Independence. Let us reflect on the sacrifices, hardships, actions, and decisions of the founding generation, the philosophy behind it all, and our history. For the flame of liberty still burns, and that ragged old flag, that star-spangled banner, still waves for the land of the free and the home of the brave. Thank you all for watching. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you all next time on the History Inquirer. Thank you.